My name is Nora. I am 32 years old. 6 weeks after I bought my own house, my brother sued me, claiming it belonged to the family fund. My parents said nothing as police put me in handcuffs and led me away. But they didn't realize they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Seattle, Washington, my family operated on a very strict hierarchy. My older brother Trent was the undisputed golden child, a man whose grandiose business ideas were always funded by my parents, no matter how many times he failed. I was the invisible daughter, expected to remain quiet, ask for nothing, and absorb their endless criticism. I had spent my entire adult life building my career in absolute secrecy, insulating myself from their toxic financial demands. 6 weeks ago, I finally closed on a stunning $1.2 million craftsman home in one of Seattle's most quiet, leafy neighborhoods. It was my sanctuary. It was the physical proof that I had survived them and built something entirely my own. That sanctuary was violated on a rainy Tuesday evening when the flashing red and blue lights of two police cruisers illuminated my front porch. I stepped outside, confused only to be met by two stern-faced officers who immediately asked me to turn around and place my hands behind my back. The cold steel of the handcuffs biting into my wrists was a shock I could barely process. But the real shock came when I looked up and saw my family standing at the edge of my driveway. Trent stood there with his arms crossed over his expensive designer jacket, a smug, victorious smile plastered across his face. Beside him was his wife, Jada. Jada was a successful African-American luxury realtor who had always treated me with thinly veiled contempt. She was currently holding her smartphone up high, the screen glowing brightly as she actively live-streamed my arrest to her social media followers. "Do not try to fight it, you thief!" Jada called out, her voice dripping with venomous joy. "Did you honestly think a low-level desk worker could afford a property like this in Seattle? You need to return this house to the family fund immediately." I turned my gaze toward my parents, Harrison and Patricia, expecting at least a shred of parental concern. Instead, my mother turned her face away from me in absolute disgust. She stepped closer to the arresting officer, her voice loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "She is the shame of our family," Patricia said, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "Please do whatever the law requires, officer. We have recently discovered that she has been maliciously siphoning money from her father's company for years to fund her lifestyle." The words hit me like a physical blow, instantly revealing the twisted narrative they had constructed. My parents owned an import and export business that had been bleeding money for years, mostly due to Trent's constant demands for capital to fund his fake startup ventures. They had always treated me as the family scapegoat, but orchestrating my arrest to steal my legally purchased home was a level of betrayal I had not anticipated. The officers guided me toward the back of the cruiser. I did not scream, I did not cry. Years of enduring their emotional abuse had taught me how to lock my emotions away and think with absolute clinical clarity. As the officer pushed my head down to clear the doorframe, I stopped and looked directly into my brother's arrogant eyes. "Are you entirely sure about those wire transfer receipts you gave the police, Trent?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Trent's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before his arrogance returned. "Enjoy your new room, Nora. It is a lot smaller than the master suite I am about to move into." The cruiser door slammed shut, plunging me into silence as the vehicle pulled away from the home I had worked so hard to buy. Sitting in the back seat, staring out at the blurred Seattle streetlights, a slow, dark smile crept across my face. They thought I was just a mid-level clerk. They had absolutely no idea that I was a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest auditing firms in the country, and they had no idea that I had been tracking their financial moves for 3 years. The interrogation room at the precinct was exactly as sterile and freezing as television portrayed it. A single fluorescent bulb hummed above a scratched metal table. Detective Reynolds, a tired-looking man with a thick folder, sat across from me. He slid a stack of printed bank statements and wire transfer confirmations across the table, tapping the top page with his pen. Your brother Trent provided these records this morning. Detective Reynolds said, his tone heavy with assumption. They show a clear trail of $1.2 million moving directly from the corporate accounts of Harrison and Patricia's import business into the escrow account used to purchase your home. Your family is pressing charges for grand theft and corporate embezzlement. I looked down at the papers. Even upside down, I could spot the amateurish formatting errors. Trent had always been sloppy. Before I could respond, the heavy metal door swung open. My attorney, Mr. Collins, a razor-sharp financial lawyer in his early 60s, walked in carrying a massive leather briefcase. He took the seat next to me, offering a reassuring nod before turning his steely gaze onto the detective. My client will not be answering any questions based on fabricated evidence, Collins stated firmly. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a bound stack of officially notarized banking documents, dropping them onto the table with a heavy thud. I leaned forward, folding my hands together. Detective, I am a certified forensic accountant. My daily job is to dissect complex corporate fraud. The documents my brother gave you are poorly executed forgeries. If you look closely at the routing numbers on his wire transfers, you will see they correspond to a regional bank that was dissolved in a merger 2 years ago. Furthermore, the SWIFT codes listed do not match international or domestic transfer protocols for that specific financial quarter. The detective frowned, pulling Trent's papers closer and comparing them against the official documents Collins had just provided. The $1.2 million used to purchase my home did not come from my parents' failing company. I continued, my voice steady and authoritative. The funds were wired directly from a blind trust established in my name 5 years ago. My wealth comes from independent, highly successful stock market investments and aggressive savings. I kept this trust completely hidden from my family because they have a long history of financial exploitation. Collins pointed to the official seals on our documents. As you can see, Detective, the money trail is indisputable. The escrow account was funded by Nora's trust. Trent has committed perjury, filed a false police report, and submitted forged financial documents to law enforcement. Detective Reynolds sat back in his chair, rubbing his forehead as the realization washed over him. The entire case against me was a fabricated lie designed to steal my property. He looked at the forged papers, then back at me, his demeanor shifting from accusatory to apologetic. I am going to have officers dispatched to arrest your brother immediately for this, Reynolds said, reaching for his radio. Wait, I said sharply, raising my hand. I want to ask for a temporary hold on his arrest. Both Collins and the detective looked at me in confusion. My family thinks they have won. I explained, my mind racing with a much larger strategy. They believe I am locked in a cell, terrified and helpless. If you arrest Trent tonight, they will just hire a defense attorney and claim it was a clerical error. I want them to dig a hole so deep they can never climb out. I want them to commit to this lie under oath. I am asking you to keep my innocence sealed from the public record for just a few days. Clear me of all charges, let me walk out of here, but do not tip them off. Detective Reynolds studied my face for a long moment. He recognized the cold calculation in my eyes. Since the evidence clearly exonerates you, you are free to go immediately. We will delay the forgery investigation on Trent for 72 hours. But whatever game you are playing, be careful. I thanked him, gathered my coat, and walked out of the precinct into the cold, damp Seattle night. I hailed a taxi, instructing the driver to take me back to my neighborhood. I needed to see exactly how quickly my family would move to claim their stolen prize. The taxi dropped me off a block away from my house just after midnight. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the streetlights. I walked quietly up my driveway, pulling my house keys from my pocket. I slipped the key into the heavy brass lock of my front door, but it refused to turn. I tried again, pushing harder, but the mechanism was entirely different. The lock had been professionally changed. I stepped back, moving into the shadows of the large oak tree in my front yard, and looked through the expansive bay windows of my living room. The lights were blazing. Inside, I saw Jada standing by the large windows holding a measuring tape. She was excitedly gesturing to Trent, clearly planning out expensive custom drapes to replace my current ones. Trent was standing by my kitchen island, popping the cork on a bottle of expensive champagne I had been saving for a special occasion. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Collins. Nora. I just checked the county civil registry, Collins said, his voice tight with frustration. Trent and your parents did not just file a police report. They filed an emergency civil injunction this afternoon, claiming that because the house was bought with stolen family funds, they had the right to instantly freeze your assets and legally occupy the property to prevent you from selling it before trial. It is a temporary order granted by a judge who assumed the police evidence was real. I can file an emergency motion in the morning to have them evicted immediately. I watched Jada laugh as Trent poured the champagne into my crystal glasses. The sheer audacity of them invading my personal space, drinking my wine and measuring my windows sent a wave of icy fury through my veins. But I did not let the anger control me. I harnessed it. No, I said softly into the phone. Do not file the eviction motion yet. Let them stay. Let them sleep in my bed tonight. Nora, they are trespassing under false pretenses, Collins warned. I know, I replied, my eyes fixed on my brother's triumphant face through the glass. But the longer they occupy that house under the claim of legal ownership, the more liable they become for the property taxes and the structural liabilities. Let them throw their little victory party. I am going to use them as bait for the IRS. I turned my back on my stolen house and walked down the dark street until I found a main avenue to hail another cab. I directed the driver to a high-end luxury hotel in downtown Seattle. If I was going to wage war, I was going to do it comfortably. Once checked into a spacious suite on the 20th floor, I ordered a pot of black coffee from room service, opened my laptop, and began the real work. 3 years ago, my parents had complained that their company's IT infrastructure was failing. Being too cheap to hire actual professionals, they begged me to fix it for free. I had upgraded their servers, but knowing my family's treacherous nature, I had also quietly installed a secure hidden backdoor tracking software into their main financial ledgers. I never intended to use it unless I was threatened. Tonight, they had declared war. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I bypassed their weak firewalls and accessed the central accounting database of their import and export business. I needed to know exactly why Trent had been so desperate to steal $1.2 million from me. The answer did not take long to find, and when I saw the raw data, I had to physically catch my breath. Trent had not just forged receipts to steal my house. He had been running a massive, sophisticated embezzlement scheme right under our parents' noses. Over the past 4 years, Trent had systematically funneled exactly $2.5 million out of the corporate accounts. He had done this by creating dummy vendor invoices for shipping services that never existed, routing the company cash into offshore shell accounts. I quickly cross-referenced the routing numbers from Trent's embezzlement with the fake receipts he had given the police. It was a masterpiece of stupidity. Trent was trying to frame me for the exact amount of money he needed to cover his most recent losses, hoping that by seizing my house he could liquidate it and quietly put the cash back into the company before our parents noticed they were on the brink of total bankruptcy. Just as I initiated the secure download of the encrypted ledgers to a separate hard drive, my phone lit up on the desk. It was a notification from our family group chat. I opened it to find a text message from my mother, Patricia. Remember to attend Thanksgiving dinner at our house on Thursday. Patricia wrote, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive authority. We expect you to be there. Do not cause a scene, and do not embarrass the family further. We need to discuss how you will make amends for what you have done. They truly believed I had been released on bail and was sitting somewhere terrified, ready to beg for their mercy. They wanted to use the Thanksgiving holiday to gloat, to break my spirit completely, and to force me into signing away the deed to my house permanently. I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, watching the progress bar hit 100% as $2.5 million worth of federal crimes were safely stored on my drive. I picked up my phone, a slow, dangerous smile curving my lips, and typed my reply to the group chat. Of course. I will see you all on Thursday. I would not miss it for the world. Thursday arrived with the crisp chill typical of a Seattle November. I pulled my car into the long driveway of my parents' suburban home, the tires crunching softly against the fallen autumn leaves. From the outside, the house looked like a perfect holiday postcard. Warm amber light spilled from the windows, and the faint scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifted through the air. Anyone walking past would assume a loving, tight-knit family was gathering inside to count their blessings. I knew better. This house was a snake pit, and tonight I was stepping right into the venom. I stepped out of the car, adjusting the collar of my emerald green silk dress. I had deliberately chosen this outfit. It was tailored, expensive, and commanded attention. I paired it with my favorite diamond earrings and a flawless blowout. I did not look like a woman who had spent Tuesday night in the back of a police cruiser. I looked like a woman who owned the world. That was exactly the message I intended to deliver. I walked up the front steps and pushed open the heavy oak door without knocking. The low murmur of voices in the living room abruptly died the moment my heels clicked against the hardwood foyer. I stepped into the archway and swept my gaze across the room. Trent was lounging in my father's favorite leather armchair, a glass of bourbon resting on his knee. Jada sat perched on the sofa next to my mother Patricia, looking through a catalog of luxury home furnishings. My father Harrison stood by the fireplace. All four of them froze, their eyes widening in collective shock. They had expected a shattered, weeping mess. They expected me to show up in sweatpants, trembling, begging for their mercy, and asking them to drop the criminal charges. Instead, I stood before them looking like a billionaire CEO arriving at a gala. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of fear. "I hope I am not interrupting the celebration." Trent was the first to recover his voice. His face flushed a deep, angry red. "What are you doing dressed like that? You are out on bail for grand theft. You should be hiding in shame, not parading around like you won the lottery." I stepped further into the room, setting my designer clutch on the entryway table. "I am not out on bail, Trent. I was released. There is a very distinct difference. But we can talk about legal definitions later. Something smells delicious. Is the turkey ready?" Jada scoffed, snapping her furniture catalog shut. "You have some serious nerve showing up here acting like nothing happened. You stole from this family. You stole from my husband. We are just trying to reclaim what is rightfully ours." I looked at Jada, maintaining a pleasant, icy smile. "Rightfully yours. That is an interesting choice of words, Jada. Tell me, how are the new drapes looking in my living room? Did you manage to find the right shade of beige to match your overwhelming sense of entitlement?" Jada bristled, standing up from the sofa. "Listen to me, you little thief. Nora, enough." My mother Patricia intervened, her voice sharp and authoritative. She stood up, smoothing the front of her apron, and marched toward me. Her eyes darted around the room, clearly wanting to avoid an explosive shouting match right in the living room, where the neighbors might hear through the open windows. "Come with me," Patricia commanded, grabbing my forearm with a grip that bruised. "We are going to the kitchen. Now." I easily yanked my arm out of her grasp, but followed her anyway. This was exactly what I wanted. I needed them to show their entire hand before I destroyed them. The moment the swinging kitchen door closed behind us, cutting us off from the rest of the family, Patricia dropped the concerned mother act. She rounded on me, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperate manipulation. "What is wrong with you?" Patricia hissed, keeping her voice to a harsh whisper. "Why are you purposely antagonizing your brother? We invited you here today to give you an out, Nora. A chance to fix this mess you created without dragging our family name through the mud in a public courtroom." I leaned against the granite countertop, crossing my arms. "I created this mess. That is a fascinating perspective, Mom. Trent forged banking documents to steal my house, and you stood on my porch telling the police I was a criminal. How exactly is this my mess?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively, an old tactic she used whenever facts contradicted her reality. "You are being completely unreasonable. You do not even need a house that big. You are single. You live alone. You sit at a desk all day. Trent is a businessman. He has investors to entertain. His startup is hitting a rough patch, and he needs liquid assets to stay afloat." I stared at her, letting her words sink in. She was openly admitting that she knew Trent needed money. "And Jada," Patricia continued, her voice softening into a fake, syrupy tone as she attempted to gaslight me. Jada is trying to get pregnant. They want to start a family. They need space, Nora. They need that home. Why are you being so stubborn? If you just sign the property transfer papers today, we will drop the lawsuit. We will tell the police it was a big misunderstanding. We have a notary coming over after dessert. Just sign the deed over to your brother. Do this for the family, so we can finally have some peace. I let out a slow, dry laugh. You want me to sign away my $1.2 million home to a man who has never held down a real job in his life? You want me to reward Trent for committing federal fraud? Patricia's eyes narrowed. It is not fraud. It is family money. You have always been jealous of Trent. You have always tried to outshine him. This is your chance to finally be a good sister. A good sister, I repeated, stepping away from the counter and closing the distance between us. You mean a sacrificial lamb. You know exactly what Trent did. Do you not? You know he has been stealing from the company for years, and you are trying to use my house to cover his tracks. Patricia went perfectly still. The color drained from her cheeks, confirming everything I needed to know. But instead of apologizing, she panicked. Her panic quickly morphed into violent rage. She grabbed a half-full glass of red wine sitting on the kitchen island. You ungrateful, malicious brat! Before I could react, Patricia violently hurled the contents of the glass directly at me. The dark red wine splashed across the front of my emerald silk dress, staining the expensive fabric instantly. The liquid dripped down my chest and splattered onto the pristine white kitchen tiles. Patricia stood there, breathing heavily, the empty glass trembling in her fist. You have always been this selfish. The kitchen door swung open and Jada glided in holding a stack of fabric swatches. She stopped, her eyes taking in the scene: the shattered glass on the floor, the dark red stains spreading across my expensive silk dress, and my mother's flushed, angry face. Jada's expression shifted instantly into a mask of exaggerated, almost theatrical concern. Oh my goodness, Nora. What happened? Jada gasped, rushing over. She grabbed a dish towel from the counter and dabbed ineffectively at the wine stain on my dress, her touch light and entirely unhelpful. Patricia, you really must be more careful with your wine. We do not want to ruin Nora's lovely outfit. It looks like it might actually be silk. I caught her wrist, stopping her frantic dabbing. The fabric is ruined, Jada. Do not pretend you care. Jada sighed heavily, dropping the towel onto the counter. She leaned back, crossing her arms, her sympathetic facade dissolving into a look of deep-seated resentment. You know, Nora, you always make everything so difficult. You walk in here acting like you own the world, looking down your nose at us. You have no idea what it takes to actually build a life. I raised an eyebrow, wiping a stray drop of wine from my cheek. I am fairly certain I understand exactly what it takes, considering I bought that house with my own money. Jada let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Your own money, please. We all know you have been leeching off your parents' company. Do you think a mid-level desk jockey could afford a property in that neighborhood? I am a luxury realtor, Nora. I know what those homes cost. I know the kind of people who buy them. They are people who work hard, who hustle every single day, people like me. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a harsh, lecturing tone. You have no idea what I have had to overcome. As a Black woman in the luxury real estate market in Seattle, I have to work 10 times harder just to be taken seriously. I have to fight for every listing, every commission. I built my career from the ground up while you just sat back and expected everything to be handed to you. And when Trent finally found a way to secure our future, to get us the home we deserve, you threw a tantrum. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her delusion. Securing your future? Is that what you call forging bank records and committing grand theft? Jada waved a hand dismissively. Trent was just recovering family assets. You had no right to that money. We need that house, Nora. We are building a family. You are just existing. She turned away, walking over to the kitchen island to inspect her fabric swatches. By the way, I hope you did not leave anything important in those awful cheap dressers you had in the master bedroom. I had the movers haul everything out to the dump yesterday. The entire house needs a complete overhaul. I am bringing in a designer to completely redo the interior. We are going for a modern minimalist aesthetic. Your taste was incredibly dated. You threw away my personal belongings, I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Jada did not even look up from her swatches. Consider it a favor. You clearly needed an intervention. Besides, we are hosting a massive housewarming party this weekend. I have invited all my top clients, the elite of Seattle real estate. I cannot have them walking into a house that looks like it belongs to a spinster librarian. We need this party to establish our brand, to show everyone that Trent and I have finally arrived. She turned back to me, a triumphant smile on her face. So thank you, Nora. Thank you for holding on to that property just long enough for us to take it over. It is going to be the perfect foundation for our new life. I looked at Jada, taking in her arrogance, her absolute certainty that she had won. She was a woman who believed her own lies, who felt completely justified in stealing my home because she believed she deserved it more. She had no idea the trap she had just walked into. I reached into my clutch, pulling out a small, pristine white envelope. I held it lightly between my fingers, letting the silence stretch until Jada's triumphant smile began to waver. "You are a luxury realtor, Jada," I said softly, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "You pride yourself on knowing the market, on understanding the intricacies of high-end properties." I stepped closer to her, holding her gaze. "So tell me, with all your vast experience, how could you overlook something so fundamental?" Jada frowned, glancing at the envelope in my hand. "What are you talking about?" I tapped the envelope against the granite countertop. "You see, when you use a court order to forcibly occupy a $1.2 million property and declare yourself the legal residing owner, you also assume all the liabilities associated with that property. You do not just get the keys and the prestige, you get the obligations." Jada's eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "What obligations?" "We own the house now." Trent handled the paperwork. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression. Trent handled the paperwork to freeze my assets and occupy the house. But he clearly did not read the fine print regarding the property's tax status. I slid the white envelope across the counter toward her. "You are a luxury realtor, Jada. You really should have known that when buying a house in that specific municipal district, there are often hidden costs. Did you not check the outstanding tax liens before you decided to move in?" Jada stared at the envelope, her hand hovering over it hesitantly. "What tax liens?" I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Open it, Jada. See exactly what your new foundation is going to cost you." Jada stared at the pristine white envelope sitting on the granite counter. Her manicured fingers twitched, clearly torn between her overwhelming arrogance and a sudden, creeping sense of dread. She reached for the flap, her eyes narrowing at me suspiciously. Before she could tear the paper open and discover the massive tax liability I had just handed her, the sharp, commanding sound of crystal being struck echoed from the adjacent room. My father's voice boomed down the hallway, demanding everyone gather at the dining table immediately. Jada froze. She looked at the envelope, then shot me a venomous glare, deciding she would not let me see her sweat. She shoved the envelope deep into the pocket of her tailored blazer, masking her anxiety with a rigid, dismissive posture. She brushed past me without another word, eager to return to the safety of her husband's illusions. I took a slow, calming breath. The appetizer of my revenge had been served. Now it was time for the main course. I smoothed the ruined, wine-stained silk of my dress and walked into the dining room with my head held high. The Thanksgiving table was a grotesque display of forced perfection. A massive roasted turkey sat in the center, surrounded by silver platters of traditional sides that Patricia had ordered from an expensive Seattle catering service, while claiming to her friends that she cooked them herself. Trent occupied the seat directly to the right of my father, a position of honor he had held since childhood. He sat leaning back in his chair, a glass of expensive scotch in one hand, looking every bit the triumphant heir to a kingdom built entirely on lies. Patricia took her seat next to him, casting a cold, disgusted glare at my stained dress. She looked at the spilled wine as if my ruined clothes were a personal insult to her holiday aesthetic, completely ignoring the fact that she was the one who threw the glass. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the designated spot for the family outcast. For several minutes, the only sounds in the room were the scraping of expensive silverware and the forced hollow laughter of Trent and Jada as they loudly discussed their future interior design plans for my home. They talked about ripping out my custom hardwood floors and replacing them with modern marble. I ate in total silence, chewing my food methodically, waiting for the inevitable attack. I knew exactly how my father operated. He needed an audience. He needed a stage to assert his dominance and force my submission. Right on cue, Harrison tapped his silver fork heavily against his wine glass. The sharp ringing sound instantly silenced the room. He stood up, adjusting the lapels of his suit jacket, and looked down the length of the table directly at me. His eyes were cold, unyielding, and utterly devoid of any parental warmth. "We have a lot to be thankful for this year." Harrison began, his voice taking on the booming, authoritative tone he usually reserved for his company board meetings. Trent is expanding his entrepreneurial ventures. The family business is entering a new critical phase of restructuring. But we also have a dark cloud hanging over this table tonight. He paused, making sure every eye in the room was fixed on me. "Nora, your behavior over the past 48 hours has been an absolute disgrace to this family. You caused a humiliating scene with the police at your brother's new house. You have acted with extreme selfishness and greed. Trent is on the verge of a major breakthrough with his latest company, and he needs liquid assets to secure his future. You, on the other hand, sit at a desk all day. You play with spreadsheets. You are a glorified bean counter, making a modest living counting pennies and looking for rounding errors while your brother is out here trying to build a lasting legacy. You have no vision, Nora. You never did." He leaned forward, placing his heavy hands flat on the polished mahogany table. The room was suffocatingly tense. "Your mother and I have discussed this situation at length," Harrison continued. "We are willing to forgive your malicious outburst, but there are strict conditions. You will stand up right now and apologize to your brother for the stress you have caused him and his wife. Then first thing tomorrow morning, you will go to the county clerk's office and sign the official transfer deed for that house over to Trent. It is the only way to make things right. You owe this family, Nora. We raised you. It is time you finally paid your dues and supported your brother." The utter silence in the dining room was deafening. Trent looked at me with a lazy, expectant smirk, fully anticipating me to crumble under our father's command, just as I had done when I was a terrified teenager. Patricia nodded in agreement, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Jada watched me like a hawk, one hand resting nervously on the pocket where my tax envelope was hidden. I slowly placed my linen napkin on the table. I pushed my chair back and stood up to meet my father's gaze. My pulse was perfectly steady. My mind was completely clear. I looked at Harrison, then at Patricia, and finally at Trent. "I do not owe this family a single dime," I said, my voice ringing clearly off the high walls of the dining room. "I certainly do not owe an apology to a man who forged banking documents to steal a property he could never afford on his own. You call my career counting pennies. That is fine, because those pennies bought me a $1.2 million house in cash. I built my life from the ground up while you funded Trent's endless string of pathetic failures. You want me to sign over my house to fix your broken company and pay off Trent's debts. My answer is absolutely not. I will never sign those papers. I will not apologize. And if you want to claim that house belongs to the family fund, you are going to have to prove it to a federal judge. I will see all of you in court." I grabbed my purse from the back of my chair and turned to leave the room, satisfied that I had delivered exactly what I came to say. But Trent's loud, mocking laughter stopped me in my tracks. He clapped his hands slowly, a dramatic, condescending gesture that echoed over the table. "That was a great speech," Nora, Trent said, pulling a thick, folded legal document from the inside pocket of his blazer. "Truly inspiring. But you are a little late to the party." He tossed the heavy stack of papers across the table. It slid past the roasted turkey and came to a halt right in front of my empty plate. "We already went to a judge," Trent sneered, his eyes flashing with absolute malice. "We filed a $3 million civil lawsuit against you this morning for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and the deliberate destruction of family property. You are going to pay for everything you ruined. Good luck paying for a defense lawyer when your accounts are frozen." I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents resting next to my empty plate. A $3 million lawsuit. They really thought freezing my known bank accounts would leave me defenseless. They had no idea my primary wealth was secured in an offshore trust they could not even subpoena without federal intervention. I reached out, picked up the lawsuit, and calmly placed it inside my designer bag. "I will see you all in court," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, dangerous finality. "Enjoy your Thanksgiving." I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back as I crossed the foyer, opened the heavy oak door, and stepped out into the freezing November night. The cold air hit my face immediately, snapping away the suffocating tension of that house. I walked down the driveway to my car, my steps measured and calm. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I did not drive away immediately. Instead, I turned on the heater, reached into the passenger seat, and opened my laptop. Earlier that week, when I breached the central accounting database of their import and export business, I had noticed a secondary server. It was a secure cloud storage system my father used to archive audio recordings of their quarterly executive board meetings. Harrison always loved the sound of his own voice and insisted on recording their strategy sessions for the company archives. It was a massive vulnerability, and I had initiated a background download of the last 12 months of audio files before arriving at dinner. The progress bar on my screen sat at 99%. A moment later, a green checkmark flashed. "Download complete." I plugged in my earphones. I needed to know exactly when the plan to frame me had been set into motion. I sorted the audio files by date, skipping past the mundane financial summaries and operational complaints until I found a recording dated 2 days before my arrest. The file was labeled Emergency Restructuring. I hit play. The audio was crisp. I heard the clinking of glasses, the scraping of chairs, and then the unmistakable sound of my father pacing the floor of his office. $2.5 million. Trent Harrison's recorded voice bellowed, vibrating with a mixture of panic and rage. "You funneled $2.5 million out of our operating budget into shell companies that do not exist. The auditors are coming next month. If they see these ledgers, you are going to federal prison." I held my breath, gripping the steering wheel. I was trying to double it. Trent's voice whined, lacking all the arrogance he had displayed at the dinner table tonight. The crypto investment was a sure thing. I just needed a little more time to move the funds back. "You have to help me, Dad. If the authorities look into this, I am ruined. We cannot just write off a $2 million deficit." Patricia's voice chimed in, sharp and frantic. "The business will go under. We will lose the house, the cars, everything. We need a scapegoat. We need someone who had access to the servers." A heavy silence filled the recording. Then my mother spoke again, her tone dropping into a cold, calculated whisper that made my blood run instantly cold. "Nora upgraded the servers last year," Patricia said. "She set up the firewalls. She is an accountant. If we manipulate the internal IP logs, we can make it look like she bypassed the security protocols to route the money to herself." Nora, Harrison asked, hesitating for only a fraction of a second. "She just bought that massive house in Seattle. She paid in cash. We could tell the police she bought it using the stolen company funds. We seize the house, liquidate it, and pump the cash back into the business accounts before the auditors arrive." "But she will be arrested," Trent said. "She will go to jail." "She is tough," Patricia replied without a single ounce of maternal hesitation. "She will survive a few years in a minimum security facility. But Trent, you would not last a week in federal prison. You are the heir to this company. Nora has always been entirely selfish, living in her own little world. It is time she finally took a bullet for this family." I paused the recording. The silence in my car was deafening. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from a profound, agonizing heartbreak that quickly crystallized into absolute rage. They knew. They had known all along. For years, I had convinced myself that my parents were simply blinded by their favoritism. I thought they enabled Trent because they were foolish because they refused to see his incompetence. I thought my arrest was just another consequence of Trent lying to them, manipulating their blind trust to cover his own tracks. But this audio file proved the horrifying truth. Harrison and Patricia were not victims of Trent's deception. They were the architects of my destruction. They had sat in a room, reviewed the evidence of their golden child's felony, and actively conspired to send their own daughter to prison to protect him. They were willing to strip away my freedom, my career, and my sanctuary, all to cover a deficit they helped create. They had looked at me my entire life and seen nothing but a disposable asset, a human shield for Trent's failures. Any lingering shred of familial loyalty, any microscopic hesitation I had about destroying them, vanished completely in the freezing air of my car. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I closed my laptop, my heart beating with a slow, mechanical rhythm. I was no longer dealing with misguided parents. I was dealing with criminals who needed to be systematically dismantled. My phone screen suddenly lit up the dark interior of the car, vibrating against the center console. I picked it up, expecting a furious text from Trent, or a demanding follow-up from Patricia. Instead, an electronic invitation notification flashed across the screen. It was from Jada. I opened the email. An elegant gold-foiled digital card expanded on my screen. The bold cursive font read, "You are cordially invited to the housewarming gala of Trent and Jada. Join us in celebrating our new $1.2 million Seattle estate. Dress code is strict black tie." Below the text was a picture of my house, my sanctuary, the home I had bought with money I earned through years of relentless, exhausting work. They were throwing a massive party in my living room, inviting their wealthy friends and real estate clients to parade through my halls and admire the spoils of their crime. They were celebrating their victory, completely unaware that they were dancing on a trapdoor I was about to swing wide open. I stared at the RSVP buttons at the bottom of the screen. Decline or attending. A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face, reflecting in the dark glass of the windshield. They wanted to play a public game. They wanted to show off their stolen prize to the world. I would be more than happy to give them an unforgettable show. I tapped the screen, selecting attending. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, shifted the car into drive, and pulled out of the driveway, leaving the toxic illusion of my family in the rearview mirror. The war had officially begun, and I was going to burn their kingdom to the ground. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy downpour typical for a Seattle November, but inside my luxury hotel suite, the atmosphere was perfectly controlled. I sat at the glass desk, a cup of black coffee steaming next to my open laptop. I had connected the laptop to the suite's large flat-screen television, creating a makeshift command center. On the screen, 4 high-definition video feeds played in real time. When I renovated the Craftsman house, I did not just focus on the aesthetics and the custom woodwork. I installed a state-of-the-art military-grade smart home security system. Discrete pinhole cameras were seamlessly integrated into the crown molding of the living room, the digital panel of the kitchen refrigerator, the hallway smoke detectors, and the front porch awning. Jada, despite her self-proclaimed expertise in luxury real estate, was entirely oblivious. She likely assumed the tiny glass sensors were part of the home's automated climate control. Her ignorance was giving me a front-row seat to her grand performance. The feed from the living room showed a scene of absolute excess. Jada had spared no expense, likely putting the entire catering bill on a high-interest credit card she could barely afford. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of caviar, artisanal bruschetta, and expensive champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner near the bay windows. The room was packed with Seattle's real estate elite, wealthy investors, managing brokers, and local socialites. They were exactly the kind of people Jada desperately wanted to impress to elevate her own status. I unmuted the audio feed. The sound quality was impeccable, capturing every boast, every laugh, and every lie. Trent stood by the stone fireplace, a crystal tumbler of my vintage scotch in his hand. He was talking to a pair of venture capitalists I recognized from a local financial magazine. It is all about aggressive expansion, Trent told them, swirling the amber liquid with practiced arrogance. My new startup is positioned to disrupt the entire supply chain sector. Securing this estate was just the first step in our new wealth management strategy. We paid cash naturally. You have to move fast in this market. I chuckled, taking a slow sip of my coffee. He was standing in a stolen house drinking my stolen liquor and bragging about stolen money. He was playing the role of the self-made tycoon to absolute perfection, completely unaware that he was recording his own confession. I switched the primary audio to the kitchen feed. Jada was holding court with a group of rival real estate agents. She wore a stunning crimson gown, gesturing dramatically as she explained the home's architecture. I knew the moment I saw this property that it had potential, Jada boasted, tracing her manicured fingers over my custom granite countertops. The previous owner was an absolute disaster. A real hoarder situation, quite frankly. She had zero taste. I had to throw out truckloads of cheap garbage just to uncover the good bones of the house. But my husband and I have an eye for these diamonds in the rough. We basically rescued this neighborhood. I brought in contractors immediately to redo this kitchen island. I shook my head at the sheer audacity. She was taking credit for the custom island I had spent weeks designing with a local artisan. I recorded every single frame and every audio bite. This footage was not just highly entertaining, it was admissible evidence. By throwing this lavish party and claiming the renovations and the purchase as their own, they were legally tying themselves to the property. They were establishing themselves as the undisputed masters of the domain, and in doing so, assuming every ounce of liability attached to it. They were throwing a massive celebration on the deck of a sinking ship. The party carried on for hours. The guests grew louder as the expensive champagne flowed freely. Jada floated from group to group, soaking up the praise and admiration she had stolen from me. She looked radiant, convinced that she had finally defeated her husband's invisible sister and secured her place in high society. Trent looked equally victorious, laughing loudly at his own jokes and clapping wealthy investors on the back. I watched them toast to their bright future, completely blind to the crosshairs I had painted directly on their backs. They thought they had won. They thought my clicking, attending on the digital invitation, was just a pathetic passive-aggressive click from a woman sitting in a jail cell. They had no idea I was watching their every move, gathering the exact ammunition I needed to bury them. Just as Trent raised his glass to call for a toast to the entire room, a sharp, insistent knock echoed from the front porch. The smart doorbell chimed a melodic tune that briefly silenced the string quartet and caused a lull in the conversations. I switched my focus to the exterior camera feed. A delivery man in a dark, waterproof uniform stood on my porch, shielded from the heavy rain by the deep awning. He was holding an absolutely massive, obnoxiously extravagant floral arrangement composed of dozens of black roses and white lilies. Jada, eager to show off her impeccable hostess skills, hurried to the entryway and pulled open the heavy oak door. The delivery man offered a polite, professional smile. "Special delivery for the homeowner," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hidden porch microphone. Jada beamed, turning slightly so her VIP guests in the living room could see the magnificent, imposing bouquet. "Oh, how absolutely wonderful," Jada cooed, stepping forward to take the heavy crystal vase into her arms. "Some of my clients are just too generous. They really spoil me." She set the massive arrangement on the entryway table right under the hallway camera and reached for the small, thick card tucked carefully among the white lilies. "Let us see who these are from." I leaned forward in my hotel chair, resting my chin on my folded hands, a cold, predatory smile forming on my lips. Jada opened the small envelope with a manicured fingernail, pulled out the card, and began to read. Her radiant, triumphant smile instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. The card was very simple, written in elegant calligraphy. It read, "Congratulations on your new liabilities. Enjoy the party while it lasts. Warmest regards, Nora." Jada's eyes darted frantically around the front yard, peering out into the rainy darkness, suddenly realizing that her perfect, victorious night was completely compromised. Trent noticed her rigid posture from across the room. He handed his crystal tumbler of my expensive scotch to a passing waiter and excused himself from the group of venture capitalists, his brow furrowing as he strode toward the entryway. He reached Jada just as she was attempting to shove the small calligraphy card down the front of her designer gown, her breathing shallow and rapid. "What is going on?" Trent demanded, his voice low but sharp, mindful of the wealthy guests mingling just a few feet away. "Who sent those flowers?" Jada could barely form the words. Her hands trembled violently as she pointed a manicured finger at the towering arrangement of black roses and white lilies. "It is from Nora," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure terror. "She knows we are here. She sent these." Trent snatched the small card from Jada's shaking hand. He read the elegant script, his jaw tightening. A dark flush of anger crept up his neck. He looked at the massive floral display, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He grabbed the thick stems of the white lilies and yanked them aside, ignoring the water that spilled over the edge of the crystal vase onto the polished hardwood floor. Hidden deep within the damp floral foam at the base of the arrangement was a thick waterproof plastic sleeve. Trent pulled it free. Inside the sleeve was an official document bearing the unmistakable seal of the King County Assessor's Office, stamped with an urgent red warning label. I sat back in my hotel chair watching the high-definition feed from the entryway camera. A genuine, unrestrained laugh escaped my lips. Trent was about to learn a very expensive lesson about luxury real estate and the legal consequences of stealing property. Trent ripped open the waterproof sleeve and pulled out the heavy parchment paper. As his eyes scanned the document, the arrogant, triumphant smirk he had worn all evening vanished instantly. The paper was a finalized, expedited annual property tax assessment. When Trent and Patricia filed their fraudulent emergency injunction to seize my house, they claimed immediate legal custodianship and primary residency to lock me out. My lawyer and I had anticipated this exact maneuver. What Trent failed to realize was that claiming legal possession of a $1.2 million luxury estate immediately transferred the immediate tax liabilities to the new registered custodians. I had intentionally delayed paying the annual property taxes, knowing the county would issue a final notice by the end of November. Furthermore, the moment I was served with their lawsuit, I officially notified the county of the disputed residency, triggering a mandatory reassessment under the city's new luxury housing tax code. Because Trent and Jada had officially registered themselves as the legal occupants to enforce their lockout, the massive, newly assessed tax burden fell squarely onto their shoulders. The document in Trent's trembling hands was a final demand notice for $40,000 in unpaid property taxes and municipal luxury levies. Bold red text across the bottom of the page dictated that the balance must be paid in full within exactly 7 days. Failure to comply would result in an immediate federal tax lien, the freezing of all associated personal bank accounts, and severe financial penalties. $40,000. Trent breathed, his voice barely audible over the sound of the string quartet playing in the living room. Due in 7 days. Jada snatched the paper from his hands, her eyes scanning the terrifying numbers. Her face transformed from panic to absolute horror. 40,000, Trent. What is this? We do not have $40,000. We maxed out our credit cards just to pay the caterers and buy the champagne for tonight. We do not even have $400 in our checking account right now. Keep your voice down, Trent hissed, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the crowded living room. The venture capitalists he had been trying to impress were looking in their direction, clearly noticing the sudden shift in the host's demeanor. Trent forced a wide fake smile, offering a polite nod to his guests, before turning his back to them. He grabbed Jada tightly by the upper arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "Smile," Trent ordered through gritted teeth. "Smile right now and walk upstairs. Do not make a scene. Do not let them see you sweat." I switched my attention to the camera feed in the upstairs master suite. I watched as Trent shoved the heavy oak door open and dragged Jada inside, slamming it shut behind them. The illusion of their glamorous, wealthy lifestyle completely shattered the second the door clicked shut. The contrast between the elegant, sophisticated party downstairs and the ugly, desperate reality upstairs was cinematic. "What did you do?" Jada shrieked, no longer caring about her volume. She threw the county tax bill at Trent's chest. It fluttered to the custom hardwood floor. "You told me seizing this house was a stroke of genius. You told me your mother had handled all the legal loopholes. Now the county is threatening to freeze our accounts in a week. If my real estate brokerage finds out I have a federal tax lien, I will lose my license." "I did not know about the tax reassessment," Trent yelled back, pacing frantically at the foot of my bed. "Nora must have set this up. She deliberately withheld the property taxes, knowing we would claim residency. She trapped us." "You trapped us!" Jada screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the hidden microphone. "You are the one who forged those banking documents. You are the one who dragged me into this insane lawsuit to cover up your stolen company funds. I thought we were getting a free luxury estate. I thought we were finally going to be rich. You told me we were invincible." "We are rich," Trent insisted, running a panicked hand through his perfectly styled hair. "We just need to liquidate some of the company assets. I will call my dad tomorrow. Harrison will front us the $40,000 to keep the county off our backs until we sell the house. We just need to stall them." "Your dad is already dodging auditors because of the $2.5 million you stole from him," Jada retorted, her chest heaving with rage. "Do you really think he has $40,000 in liquid cash just lying around to bail you out again? Your family business is bleeding dry. You are all a bunch of frauds." Trent lunged forward, grabbing Jada by the shoulders, his eyes wild with desperation. "You need to calm down and trust me. I am the heir to the company. I will figure it out. The house is fully paid off. We just need a bridge loan to cover the taxes. We are still winning." Jada stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of disgust and absolute terror. The realization that she had tied herself to a man whose entire existence was built on a fragile house of cards finally broke her. She looked at his desperate, lying face and realized that the lavish lifestyle she had been bragging about downstairs was nothing but an illusion. She pulled her arm back and delivered a vicious, ringing slap directly across Trent's face. The sound cracked like a whip through my laptop speakers. Trent stumbled backward, clutching his reddened cheek in sheer shock. "You said this house was fully paid off!" Jada screamed, her voice raw and hysterical. "Where am I supposed to get $40,000 in cash right now? I will find a way to fix this. I swear." Trent's panicked voice echoed through the hidden bedroom camera. He stumbled backward, his hand still pressed against his reddened cheek where Jada had struck him. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting wildly around the master suite he had so arrogantly claimed as his own. "Fix it!" Jada shrieked, advancing on him with her fists clenched. "You lied to me. You told me you were a multimillionaire. Get out, go fix it, or do not bother coming back." Trent did not stay to argue. He turned and bolted. I watched the living room feed as he shoved his way past his bewildered champagne-sipping guests, ignoring their shocked questions as he practically sprinted out the front door and into the freezing Seattle rain. I sat back in my hotel chair and took a slow sip of my black coffee. The appetizer was officially over. It was time to switch channels. I closed the smart home video feeds and opened a secure terminal window on my laptop. Months ago, when I was still the chief financial officer and IT administrator for my father's company, I had implemented a mandatory mobile device management protocol for all executive electronics. I told my father it was to protect corporate secrets from industrial espionage. In reality, it gave me root access to every single phone on the company plan. My family, drowning in their own arrogance and technological ignorance, had blindly signed the user agreements without a second thought. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard firewalls. I executed a silent command script, remotely activating the microphone on Trent's phone. Instantly, the sound of heavy, jagged breathing filled my hotel room. A car door slammed shut. The engine of Trent's leased sports car roared to life, followed by the frantic scraping of windshield wipers. I listened to the squeal of tires as he aggressively sped through the wet streets, heading straight for the corporate headquarters. He was muttering to himself a frantic, pathetic stream of curses and desperate rationalizations. He sounded completely unhinged. 10 minutes later, the screeching of tires echoed as he violently pulled into the underground executive parking garage. I heard the rapid, heavy thud of his expensive leather shoes hitting the concrete, followed by the chime of the private elevator. I leaned forward, turning the volume up to maximum. The elevator doors opened. Trent marched down the hallway and threw open the doors to my father's private office without knocking. "Dad, we have a massive emergency!" Trent gasped, his voice bordering on hysterical. "What are you doing here?" Harrison snapped. The exhaustion and irritation in his voice were palpable. "You are supposed to be hosting those venture capitalists at the house. We need their investment capital to keep the supply chain operations afloat." Nora set a trap. Trent blurted out, his breathing ragged. "She sent a floral delivery right in the middle of the party. She hid the county property tax assessment inside. $40,000, Dad. The county wants 40 grand in cash within 7 days, or they are placing a federal tax lien on the property and freezing all my personal bank accounts." Jada found out. She slapped me. "She is threatening to throw me out. I need you to wire $40,000 to my account right now to make this go away." The sound of Harrison's heavy palm slamming flat against his solid mahogany desk cracked like a gunshot through my laptop speakers. $40,000! Harrison roared, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. "Are you entirely out of your mind? Where exactly do you think I am going to get $40,000 in liquid cash to hand you tonight?" "Just pull it from the reserve fund," Trent pleaded, still desperately clinging to the illusion of their endless wealth. "Wire it from the corporate emergency account. We can classify it as a temporary property acquisition fee. I will pay it back the second we liquidate Nora's assets. Please, Dad. Jada is going to leave me if I do not walk back in there with proof that the house is secure." A harsh, guttural laugh erupted from my father. It was a terrifying, hollow sound, completely devoid of any parental warmth. "There is no reserve fund," Harrison spat, his voice dropping into a lethal, venomous register. "There is no corporate emergency account. There are no acquisition fees. Do you genuinely not comprehend what you did when you embezzled $2.5 million from this company?" Trent stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Harrison did not let him speak. "I spent the last 72 hours begging our creditors for a simple extension." Harrison yelled, the panic finally breaking through his authoritative facade. "Our credit lines are completely frozen. The suppliers are threatening to halt all warehouse shipments by Friday morning. We are bleeding cash so fast we cannot even make the basic payroll for the floor staff next week. We are broke, Trent. We are completely, entirely, undeniably broke." "That is impossible," Trent argued weakly. "We do tens of millions in revenue every year. The company is a giant." "Revenue is not profit, you absolute idiot," Harrison screamed. "And whatever profit margin we had, you dumped into a phantom cryptocurrency scheme that vanished overnight." Nora was the only person keeping the ledgers balanced and the creditors at bay. "Since we fired her and framed her, the entire accounting department is in absolute shambles. We literally do not have 40,000 cents to spare, let alone $40,000 to bail you out of a tax bill you were too stupid to anticipate." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could perfectly picture Trent standing in the middle of that lavish office, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket, the grand illusion of his untouchable wealth evaporating into nothingness. The devastating reality of their actions was finally crashing down on them. "Dad, please," Trent begged, his voice dropping into a pathetic, broken whimper. "Jada is furious. She knows we are broke. If you do not find a way to give me that money, she is going to divorce me. I will lose my wife, my house, my reputation. I will lose everything." I held my breath, waiting for my father's response. I heard the slow creak of leather as Harrison leaned heavily back in his executive chair. When he finally spoke, his voice was chillingly calm, calculated and stripped of any human empathy. "Then there is only one option left," Harrison said. "We have to win the $3 million lawsuit against Nora at all costs. She is our only way out." I pulled the earpiece from my ear, letting the heavy silence of my car wash over me. She is our only way out. My father's desperate gravelly voice echoed in my mind, a pathetic soundtrack to his own ruin. They were cornered rats, completely bankrupt and terrified of federal prison banking, their entire survival on a fabricated lawsuit against me. I closed my laptop and took a deep, steadying breath. The anxiety that had plagued me for my entire childhood, that suffocating need to please them, was completely gone. I felt nothing but cold surgical precision. The pieces of their destruction were perfectly aligned. Now it was just a matter of knocking them down. The next morning, the Seattle sky was a bruised, heavy gray as I walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Collins & Associates. Marcus Collins, the ruthless corporate litigator I had retained the moment the police showed up at my house, was already waiting. He did not look happy. His usually immaculate suit jacket was draped haphazardly over a chair, and he was staring intently at a thick stack of papers on his mahogany table. He looked up as I entered, his expression tight with concern. "Good morning, Nora." Marcus said, his tone completely stripped of pleasantries. "We have a serious problem. Trent's legal team just sent over a settlement offer, but it is not a negotiation. It is a classic extortion play. They are trying to break you before we even sit down for the deposition tomorrow." He slid a glossy manila folder across the polished wood. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a drafted press release and a thick stack of printed emails. The emails were heavily doctored, pieced together with stolen company letterheads to make it look like I had been deliberately siphoning client funds from my independent accounting firm into illegal offshore accounts. The press release was addressed to the Seattle Business Journal, the Wall Street Journal, and several prominent local news outlets. It accused me of orchestrating a massive multi-year embezzlement scheme that had actively defrauded my father's business. "Their terms are simple," Marcus explained, leaning over the table, his eyes locked on mine. "You sign over the deed to your house immediately and pay a $1 million settlement for the corporate fraud charges they filed against you. In exchange, they drop the lawsuit and bury this press release. If you refuse, they send these fabricated emails to every major financial publication in the Pacific Northwest by noon today." Marcus paused, letting the heavy weight of the threat settle in the quiet room. "Nora, you need to understand the severity of this. Even if we prove these emails are completely fake in court, the media fallout will destroy your accounting firm overnight. Your clients will flee the moment the allegations hit the internet. Your reputation in the financial sector will be completely radioactive. You will be professionally ruined before we even reach the deposition table. They are holding a loaded gun to your career." I looked down at the doctored emails, my expression completely unchanged. Trent was getting lazy and sloppy. He had used a basic IP masking tool to generate the fake correspondence, but looking at the header data, he had routed the fake server through the exact same hosting company Patricia used for her high-end catering orders. It was painfully obvious, the desperate flailing of a man who realized his back was against the wall and had no idea how to properly execute a digital frame-up. I dropped the papers back onto the desk and leaned back in my leather chair. "Let them send it." Marcus blinked, clearly thrown off guard by my complete lack of panic. He ran a hand over his face, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Nora, you are not listening to me. This is a targeted character assassination. They are trying to force you into submission. If they pull the trigger on this, we will be fighting a brutal war on two fronts, legal and public relations. We need to file an emergency injunction to block the publication." "I am listening perfectly, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "But you are looking at this like a traditional defense attorney. I am not here to play defense anymore. Trent and Harrison are bluffing. They do not want media attention. They are absolutely terrified of it." Marcus frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. "Why would they be terrified? They are currently playing the victims." "Because they are completely broke," I revealed, watching Marcus's eyes widen in real time. "Trent did not just mismanage their funds. He embezzled $2.5 million and lost every single cent of it in a phantom cryptocurrency scheme. The company's credit lines are completely frozen, and they cannot even make payroll next week." If the press starts digging into my finances, investigative journalists will inevitably start digging into Harrison's import ledgers to verify their claims. And Harrison cannot afford a single federal eye looking at his books right now. This threat is a smokescreen. They are trying to steal my house to liquidate it and cover their stolen funds before the corporate auditors arrive next month. Marcus stared at me in stunned silence. The pieces were finally clicking into place for him. If what you are saying is true, he murmured, his legal mind racing, this lawsuit is not just malicious, it is a criminal conspiracy to commit real estate fraud and extortion. But Nora, we need hard proof to bring that to a deposition. We cannot just walk in there with theories. I unzipped my designer bag and pulled out a small encrypted titanium flash drive. I placed it gently on the glass table. The metallic clink echoed sharply in the quiet room. They think they can scare me by threatening my reputation, I said, staring at the small drive. They think I am the same obedient daughter who used to count their pennies, fix their mistakes, and take their abuse in total silence. But they are operating on severely outdated information. I have the audio recordings of Harrison and Trent discussing their embezzlement. But that is just to destroy the company. I want to dismantle their entire reality. I stood up and pointed toward the multimedia console at the far end of the conference table. Close the blinds, Marcus, I instructed, my voice dropping into an icy, authoritative command. And turn on the projector. Marcus hesitated for only a fraction of a second before complying. He hit a switch on the wall. The heavy blackout shades lowered automatically, plunging the room into deep shadows. The ceiling projector hummed to life, casting a bright, glowing blue square against the pristine white wall. I walked over, plugged my flash drive into his console, and bypassed my own security encryption with a few rapid keystrokes. Trent thinks he is the only one in the family who knows how to hide money, I said, as a series of complex banking schematics, wire transfer logs, and offshore corporate registry documents flooded the massive screen. He was so busy trying to cover up his own $2 million disaster that he never bothered to check his own wife's financial footprint. I grabbed a laser pointer from the desk and highlighted a specific recurring routing number that connected a Seattle real estate escrow account to a heavily guarded offshore bank. Marcus, I want you to look very closely at this, I said, tapping the red laser against the screen. Let me show you exactly what Jada has been doing with the deposits from her wealthy real estate clients. Welcome to her secret shell company in the Cayman Islands. Marcus stepped closer to the projection, his eyes tracing the complex web of red lines and routing numbers connecting Trent's corporate access codes directly to Jada's real estate brokerage. The glowing blue light from the projector reflected in his eyes as he leaned in, his breath catching as he read the names of the offshore entities. He was a veteran corporate litigator, a man accustomed to hiring teams of private investigators and forensic analysts who took months to build a case half this strong. Yet here was his client presenting a bulletproof federal indictment on a silver platter. This is a masterpiece of forensic accounting, Marcus murmured, genuine awe replacing his earlier panic. You tracked the entire missing $2.5 million. Trent did not lose the money in a cryptocurrency scam, I explained, keeping my voice perfectly steady. That was the lie he fed to Harrison to explain the sudden evaporation of the company's operating capital. Trent actually wired the funds into a series of dummy vendor accounts registered in Delaware. Jada then generated fake invoices for interior design, luxury staging, and international marketing consultations for properties that did not even exist. The money washed cleanly through her brokerage and went straight into a Cayman Islands trust, completely insulated from United States tax authorities. She laundered it, Marcus said, dragging a hand through his hair in disbelief. Your sister-in-law laundered stolen corporate funds through her high-end real estate listings, and Trent handed her the cash to do it. Exactly, I said, turning off the laser pointer and setting it down on the glass table. Jada thinks she is a criminal mastermind. She assumed that because the money left the country, it was completely untraceable, but she is arrogant and lazy. She used the same IP address to access the offshore accounts that she uses to log into her home wireless network. I have the digital fingerprints for every single transaction. I have the wire transfer logs, the fake vendor invoices, and the offshore deposit receipts. Every single penny is accounted for. Marcus paced the length of the conference room. The entire landscape of the legal battle had just inverted before his eyes. Trent and Harrison were not holding a gun to my head. They were clutching a live grenade without a pin. If we take this to the federal authorities, Trent and Jada are looking at decades in federal prison. Marcus said, his voice buzzing with raw adrenaline. Wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, corporate embezzlement. We can destroy their lawsuit today. We send this file to their legal counsel right now, and they will drop the case before lunch. They will beg you for a settlement to keep you quiet. No, I said sharply, stepping away from the projector and walking back to my chair. We do not settle. We do not warn them. We let them walk right into the deposition tomorrow morning. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. Nora, they are threatening to ruin your career by noon today with that press release. If we do not stop them, the media fallout could be catastrophic for your firm. Let them release it, I replied, my voice entirely devoid of fear. Let them send their fabricated emails to every news outlet in Seattle. It only adds defamation and malicious prosecution to their growing list of felonies. Harrison and Trent are desperate. They need $3 million to save the family business from absolute bankruptcy, and they think I am a weak, easily intimidated target. They want to sit in a conference room under oath and testify that I stole that money. You want them to commit perjury? Marcus realized a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. I want them to double down on their lies on the official court record. I confirmed, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Trent will swear he knows absolutely nothing about the missing funds. Jada, who was subpoenaed as a character witness for her husband, will swear her real estate business is entirely legitimate. And my father will look me in the eye and testify that I am a thief who ruined his legacy. I want it all transcribed by a certified court reporter. I want their signatures on the deposition transcripts, confirming their fabricated stories under penalty of perjury. Marcus walked back to the table, looking down at the extortion letter and the fake press release Trent had sent over. The threat that had terrified him 20 minutes ago now looked like a child's crayon drawing compared to the mountain of federal evidence I had just unveiled. My family had spent my entire life underestimating my intelligence, treating me like a glorified calculator whose only purpose was to balance their checkbooks and clean up their messes. Their arrogance was their fatal flaw. They genuinely believed I would surrender the moment they applied pressure. They had no idea that I had spent the last 3 months building a cage around them, locking every exit and sealing every escape route. They were walking into a slaughterhouse, convinced they were the butchers. Marcus looked up from the table, his eyes locking onto mine with a new level of profound respect. The dynamic between us had shifted entirely. I was no longer just a client seeking legal protection. I was the architect of my own absolute vengeance. They filed the lawsuit. Marcus said, his voice steady and resolute. Are you ready to pull the trigger? I reached into the inner pocket of my designer bag. I did not pull out another flash drive or a stack of banking logs. Instead, I retrieved a single heavy piece of parchment paper bearing an embossed gold seal. I slid it slowly across the glass table. It was a certified share certificate boldly displaying the name Apex Holdings. Let them bury themselves under oath first. The blinking red recording light of the legal videographer's camera was the only splash of color in the sterile, heavily air-conditioned conference room. I sat with perfect, unyielding posture next to Marcus, my hands resting lightly on the polished mahogany table. Across from me sat the architects of my supposed destruction. Trent wore a bespoke suit that cost more than his remaining bank balance, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed the panic of the $40,000 tax lien hanging over his head. Jada sat rigidly beside him, her jaw tight, glaring at me with a mixture of hatred and sheer terror. Next to them sat my parents, Harrison and Patricia. They carried themselves with the absolute arrogant certainty of untouchable wealth. They genuinely believed this room was a slaughterhouse, and I was the captive prey. Richard Sterling, their aggressively priced lead litigator, paced behind his seated clients. He slapped a thick binder of documents onto the table, the sharp smack echoing in the quiet room. Let the record show that we are presenting Exhibit A, Sterling announced, his voice booming with theatrical authority. These are the internal server access logs from your father's company. They clearly indicate that a user with your exact administrative credentials bypassed the corporate firewall and initiated 17 separate wire transfers over a period of 3 weeks, draining $2.5 million from the primary operating accounts. Sterling leaned over the table, invading my personal space, trying to physically intimidate me. You were the chief financial officer and the sole IT administrator, Nora. You had the keys to the kingdom. You were angry about being terminated, so you used your root access to siphon those funds into an untraceable offshore account to purchase your luxury property. Is that correct? I looked at the fabricated logs. Trent had actually paid someone to mock up fake IP addresses, completely unaware that federal investigators could dismantle the forgery in 5 minutes. No, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. That is entirely incorrect. I did not initiate those transfers. Sterling scoffed loudly, pacing back toward Trent. You expect us to believe that someone else hacked into a highly secure corporate network, bypassed dual-factor authentication, and routed millions of dollars away without you noticing. You expect a judge to believe you are just an innocent victim who miraculously managed to buy a $1.2 million estate on a basic salary right after the company was robbed. I gave him a blank, unbothered stare. I expect the truth to be officially documented, Mr. Sterling. That is why we are here. Trent sneered, leaning forward. You are delusional, Nora. You are backed into a corner and you are still lying. Marcus held up a hand, silencing the room. Mr. Sterling, my client has answered your question on the record. If you are finished with your grandstanding, we would like to exercise our right to depose your primary witnesses. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. By all means. My clients have absolutely nothing to hide. The court reporter asked Harrison and Patricia to raise their right hands. They did so simultaneously, their faces set in expressions of solemn, manufactured grief. They swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony was suffocating. Marcus folded his hands together. Harrison, as the CEO of the company, can you please state for the record your assessment of your daughter's professional conduct and her capacity to execute the financial maneuvers in question? Harrison adjusted his tie, looking directly into the camera lens rather than at me. He was giving the performance of his life. Nora was always a difficult child. Harrison began, his voice dripping with paternal disappointment. We kept her employed out of charity. She was a glorified bookkeeper, nothing more. But she was dangerously jealous of Trent. Trent is the natural heir, the brilliant business mind who brought us into the modern era. Nora resented his success. When we discovered her incompetence and decided to let her go, she retaliated. She locked us out of our own servers and stole the company blind. Patricia chimed in smoothly, not waiting for a question. She could never afford that house on her own. It is laughable. She has no investments, no real assets, no ambition. She saw the lifestyle Trent and Jada were building, and she wanted it for herself. She stole our family money to play pretend. She is nothing but a jealous, incompetent thief who belongs in a federal prison. I sat perfectly still, letting their venom fill the room. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenograph machine, permanently transcribing every single word into a binding legal document. They were digging their own graves with unbridled enthusiasm. They actually believed that their wealth and status made their lies unquestionable. They thought the court system was just another country club where the loudest, richest voice automatically won. Sterling smiled smugly, clearly thrilled with his client's performance. I believe that covers the character assessment. Unless you are ready to sign the settlement agreement and hand over the deed to the house, Nora, I suggest we conclude for the day. You have 24 hours before we release our evidence to the press. Marcus looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a microscopic nod. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I said, breaking my long silence. My voice cut through the smug atmosphere of the room like a scalpel. There is just one final point of clarification I need on the official record. I ignored Trent, Jada, and the lawyer. I locked my eyes entirely on my parents. Harrison's arrogant posture faltered slightly under my unwavering gaze. Patricia's polite, victimized smile twitched. I did not blink. I did not look away. I let the absolute terrifying weight of the moment press down on their shoulders. You both understand that perjury is a federal crime, right? I asked softly. Harrison scoffed, exchanging a dismissive look with Patricia. They both turned back to me, their expressions hardened with absolute defiance. They confidently nodded. We understand perfectly, Harrison stated. I offered a single tight nod. Excellent. I leaned back and folded my hands in my lap, stepping out of the spotlight. I had given my parents their chance to walk away. They chose to dive headfirst into the concrete. Now it was my brother's turn. Marcus Collins stood up from his leather chair. He buttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate motion that commanded the entire room. He turned his gaze away from my parents and locked eyes with Trent. Let us move on to the primary plaintiff, Marcus announced, his voice echoing in the sterile conference room. Trent, please state your current official title within the family corporation for the record. Trent straightened his posture. He shot a smug glance at Jada, then looked directly into the recording camera. He puffed out his chest, desperate to project the image of a billionaire tycoon, rather than a man facing a $40,000 tax lien he could not pay. I am the chief executive officer in waiting, Trent declared smoothly. But functionally, I have been the primary financial architect and operational director of the company for the past 4 years. Marcus walked over to the whiteboard, capping his pen. Primary financial architect. That is an impressive title. Can you elaborate on what exactly those duties entail? Trent smirked. It means I run the show. I brought our outdated dinosaur of a company into the 21st century. I modernized our investment portfolios. I managed all major vendor acquisitions. I generated millions in new profit margins through aggressive high-level corporate strategies that people like Nora simply lack the mental capacity to comprehend. Richard Sterling, their lawyer, nodded encouragingly. Harrison and Patricia beamed with pride. They were eating up every single word. They genuinely believed Trent was dominating the deposition. I kept my face entirely blank, watching the digital timestamp on the video recording tick forward. Every second Trent spoke was another piece of irrefutable evidence. So you consider yourself a financial expert? Marcus asked, his tone laced with mild, feigned admiration. You were the one driving the economic growth. Absolutely, Trent boasted. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. I have a natural instinct for capital management. My father built the foundation, but I am the one who maximized our liquidity. I controlled the cash flow. I made sure our money was always working for us, moving capital into high-yield avenues. Marcus paced slowly behind his chair. That is fascinating, considering your sister Nora was officially listed as the chief financial officer during that exact same period. What was her role if you were managing all the capital? Trent laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Nora was a glorified secretary. We gave her a fancy title because my parents felt sorry for her. All she did was balance basic spreadsheets and file payroll taxes. She had absolutely no vision. I had to bypass her constantly just to get real business done. She did not control the money. I did. I had to because she was entirely incompetent. I felt a cold thrill wash over me. Trent was so desperate to prove his superiority, so eager to diminish my role in the company, that he was eagerly volunteering for the executioner's block. He thought he was proving that I lacked the authority to steal the missing millions. He did not realize he was formally admitting that he was the only person with the power to move those exact funds. Just to be absolutely clear for the court reporter, Marcus said, stopping his pacing and looking directly at Trent. You are stating under oath that you and you alone were the primary controller of the company's cash flow for the entirety of the last 4 years. I did not just control it. Trent bragged, his ego inflating to fill the room. I mastered it. I oversaw every major account. I audited our spending. I personally directed the movement of all significant capital. No one touched the corporate treasury without my direct, explicit authorization. Marcus picked up a legal pad from the table, pretending to review his notes. That is a massive responsibility for one person. Surely you delegated some of the digital banking tasks. Wire transfers, large vendor payments, things of that nature. I trust no one with the family money but myself, Trent stated firmly. He was practically preening now, completely intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance. I set up the secure digital banking protocols myself. I held the primary administrative tokens. Jada shifted slightly in her seat. A brief shadow of unease crossed her face. She was greedy, but she possessed a cunning survival instinct that Trent severely lacked. She glanced at Marcus, her eyes narrowing as she tried to calculate where this line of questioning was heading. But Trent was oblivious. He was too busy enjoying the sound of his own voice. Marcus took a step closer to the table, his posture shifting from curious to predatory. The easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by the lethal focus of a veteran litigator closing the jaws of a trap. "You are certain about that timeline?" Trent Marcus asked, his voice dropping an octave. "The last 4 years I am absolutely certain," Trent replied arrogantly. Marcus leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the polished wood, bringing his face level with my brother. "You confirm under penalty of perjury that 100% of the corporate wire transfers over the past 4 years were personally executed and authorized by you." Trent flashed a triumphant, condescending smile. He looked at me, his eyes shining with pure malice, believing he had just destroyed my entire defense. "That is exactly right," Trent stated. Marcus did not flinch. He simply nodded, turning his back on Trent to look at the court reporter. He waited a deliberate, calculated beat, ensuring the stenographer had captured every single syllable of my brother's arrogant confession. The digital timestamp on the recording camera blinked silently, marking the exact moment Trent sealed his own fate. "Thank you, Trent," Marcus said, his voice entirely conversational, completely unbothered by the hostility rolling across the table. "Your testimony has been incredibly illuminating. I have no further questions for you at this time." Trent blinked, his smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second. He had braced himself for a brutal cross-examination, an intense legal brawl where he could showcase his supposed dominance and humiliate me further. Instead, Marcus was simply letting him walk away. Trent puffed out his chest, adjusting his bespoke suit jacket, clearly convinced he had just intimidated my attorney into total submission. He stood up from the witness chair and swaggered back to his seat next to Jada, casting a triumphant glare in my direction. Richard Sterling leaned over to whisper something to Harrison, and my father offered a curt, satisfied nod. They thought the battle was already over. They thought the sheer weight of their fabricated narrative had crushed us. Marcus turned his attention to the other side of the table. "Ms. Jada, if you would please take the seat. We have a few questions regarding your professional assessment of the property in dispute." Jada stood up with practiced elegance. She smoothed the invisible wrinkles from her designer pencil skirt and walked to the witness chair, like she was stepping onto a runway. She raised her right hand, took the oath with a bored, condescending sigh, and sat down. She crossed her legs, resting her manicured hands on her lap, projecting the absolute certainty of a woman who believed she was unequivocally the smartest person in the room. Ms. Jada Marcus began, keeping his tone respectful and deferential. "You are a licensed luxury real estate broker in the state of Washington." "Correct. I am a managing broker," Jada corrected sharply, lifting her chin. "I run one of the most successful high-end real estate firms in the Pacific Northwest. I deal exclusively with multi-million-dollar estates, international investors, and complex corporate acquisitions. My reputation in this city is flawless." "Impressive," Marcus replied, pacing slowly across the carpet. "So it is fair to say that you possess an extensive, highly sophisticated understanding of property law, title transfers, and financial vetting processes. You are not easily fooled by fraudulent transactions." Jada offered a cold, patronizing smile. "It is my job to know exactly where money comes from, how it is routed, and who legally owns what. I do not just sell houses. I secure assets. I vet every single client, and I track every single dollar that moves through my brokerage. Nobody moves capital past me without my explicit verification." "And you apply this same meticulous financial scrutiny to your personal life?" Marcus asked, his tone laced with mild curiosity. "To the assets you share with your husband?" "Absolutely," Jada stated. "Trent and I operate as a unified team. I am fully aware of our financial standing at all times. I review our accounts, I manage our investments and I personally verify the legitimacy of every asset attached to our name. I am a professional in every aspect of my life. Marcus nodded slowly, letting her arrogant words hang in the heavy air of the conference room. The soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to amplify the silence. He walked over to his legal pad, glanced at it, and turned back to her. Let us discuss the property currently owned by Nora. In your professional opinion as a real estate expert and as someone intimately familiar with your family's finances who legally owns that estate, Jada did not even hesitate. She leaned forward, her eyes flashing with vindictive energy. The company owns it, she declared loudly, pointing a manicured finger directly at me. Nora used her administrative access to drain my father-in-law's business accounts. She funneled that stolen money through dummy corporations and used it to purchase that house in secret. As Trent's wife and a licensed broker, I personally audited the title history and the funding sources. The money she used is directly tied to the missing capital from the family business. Sterling nodded encouragingly from the sidelines. Patricia shot me a look of pure disgust, entirely convinced by her daughter-in-law's performance. They were building a fortress of lies, brick by perjured brick. So you are stating for the official record that you personally investigated the financial routing for Nora's home? Marcus asked, his voice tightening with a sudden razor-sharp focus. I did, Jada boasted, relishing the spotlight. I know exactly how to track laundered money in real estate transactions. Nora thought she was being clever, but she left a massive trail. Trent and I have every legal right to seize that property to recover the stolen funds. I can confirm unequivocally that the money used to buy her house was stolen corporate capital. You are incredibly thorough, Marcus noted. He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of her, planting his feet firmly on the carpet. You confirm that you understand the legal implications of financial routing. You confirm that you never sign a document or open an account without fully understanding its purpose. You confirm that you have absolute hands-on control over your professional brokerage accounts and your personal investments. I am a professional. Jada snapped, her patience wearing thin. She crossed her arms over her chest, glaring at him. I know exactly what I am doing. I do not make mistakes with money, and I certainly do not sign things blindly. I have total legal and financial authority over my assets. I sat perfectly still, my breathing slow and measured, maintaining an expression of complete indifference. The trap had been set, baited, and triggered. Jada had just spent the last 10 minutes building a massive, impenetrable wall of legal accountability right behind her own back. She had explicitly denied ignorance. She had explicitly claimed total mastery over her financial footprint. She had just systematically eliminated her only possible defense. Marcus walked back to the mahogany table. He did not reach for the binder of fabricated server logs. He did not look at Richard Sterling, who was busily taking notes. Instead, Marcus reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. It was a high-resolution printout of a bank authorization form. He walked back to the witness chair and placed the document face up on the table, directly in front of Jada. Jada glanced down at the paper. At first, her expression was merely annoyed, expecting another piece of irrelevant corporate documentation. Then her eyes locked onto the letterhead at the top of the page. The annoyance vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden violent paleness that drained every drop of color from her face. Her perfectly manicured fingers twitched against her skirt. Her breath caught in her throat, producing a sharp, strangled sound that echoed in the quiet room. Marcus leaned over the table, his eyes boring into hers, his voice dropping into a cold, relentless whisper. So, Ms. Jada, do you also confirm that your signature on this account opening document in the Cayman Islands is genuine? Jada was speechless. She stared at the crisp white paper as if it had suddenly caught fire. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The absolute certainty that had radiated from her just moments ago completely evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. Her manicured hands trembled so violently she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Marcus did not give her a chance to recover. He leaned closer, tapping his gold pen against the signature line on the document. The sharp clicking noise seemed deafening in the dead silence of the room. I will ask you again, Ms. Jada. Is this your signature on the incorporation documents for Apex Holdings, a shell entity registered in the Cayman Islands? Objection! Richard Sterling practically shouted, his voice stripped of its previous booming confidence. He scrambled to his feet, reaching over to grab the paper from in front of Jada. Where did you get this? This is entirely outside the scope of this deposition. It is the very heart of this deposition, Mr. Sterling Marcus countered, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Your clients accused my client of embezzlement. We are simply clarifying where the embezzled funds actually went. My client has every right to defend herself against malicious prosecution. Marcus pulled a second, much thicker stack of documents from his leather briefcase. He dropped them onto the table and began sliding copies to everyone seated. Let the record reflect that I am submitting certified banking records and international wire transfer logs, Marcus stated clearly, looking directly into the camera lens. These documents show a direct, uninterrupted flow of $2.5 million, originating from the primary operating account of the family corporation. The initial transfers were executed by Trent, using the executive security tokens he just testified to having exclusive control over. Trent's face lost all its color. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, watching the lever get pulled. He reached for the documents, his hands shaking so badly that the papers rattled loudly against the mahogany table. The stolen funds, Marcus continued mercilessly, did not go into any account associated with my client. They did not go toward the purchase of Nora's home. Instead, they were routed through 3 dummy vendor accounts registered in Delaware. All 3 vendors were incorporated under variations of Jada's maiden name. From there, every single penny was wired directly into the Apex Holdings account in the Cayman Islands. The account Jada opened. The account Jada fully controls. That is a lie. Trent croaked, his voice cracking into a high pitch. This is fabricated data. You hacked our systems. You planted this evidence to save yourself. I did not have to plant anything, I said, keeping my gaze fixed on my brother. My voice was perfectly level, a stark contrast to his rising hysteria. You two were just incredibly sloppy. You used the company's own internal servers to mask the initial transfers, leaving a permanent digital footprint in the back-end registry. You funneled the money to cover your massive cryptocurrency losses, and you used Jada's real estate credentials to make the Delaware vendors look like legitimate contractors. You thought moving it offshore made it invisible. Sterling dropped heavily back into his chair, rubbing his temples furiously. He was a seasoned attorney, and he knew exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at 2 clients who had just committed federal perjury, wire fraud, and money laundering right in front of a recording camera. His career instinct was already calculating how quickly he could recuse himself from this radioactive disaster. Harrison and Patricia sat frozen. The polished, aristocratic masks they wore so proudly had shattered into jagged pieces. Harrison stared blindly at the banking logs. His eyes scanned the highlighted routing numbers, the timestamps, and the undeniable signatures of his golden son and his perfect daughter-in-law. Trent, what is this? Harrison demanded, his voice barely a rough whisper. Look at me. Tell me this is some kind of trick. Tell me you did not steal from our company. Dad, I can explain. Trent stammered, heavy beads of sweat forming on his forehead. It was a complex investment strategy. A temporary relocation of liquid assets to avoid heavy corporate taxation. I was going to put it back before the quarter ended. You were never going to put it back, I stated flatly, cutting off his pathetic excuses. The money is gone. Jada diverted half of it to pay off her own private debts before moving the rest offshore. You bled the company completely dry, and when the auditors scheduled their quarterly review, you panicked. You needed a scapegoat. You needed someone who had administrative access, someone the family already despised, someone you thought would be too obedient to fight back. Patricia looked at me, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. She slowly turned her head to look at Jada. Jada was staring fixedly at her own hands, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the room. You framed your own sister, Patricia said, her voice shaking with disbelief. You were going to let her go to federal prison so you could keep your luxury cars and your country club memberships. They were going to do much worse than that, I corrected her coldly. They demanded I sign over the deed to my house to cover the missing funds. They were going to steal my home, ruin my professional reputation, and let me take the fall for a federal crime they orchestrated together. The conference room descended into absolute chaos. Trent was rambling incoherently, desperately trying to construct a lie to appease his lawyer, who was furiously packing his briefcase. Sterling was entirely done with them. Jada sat completely paralyzed, the reality of decades in federal prison finally piercing her arrogant delusion. Harrison looked like a broken man. His broad shoulders sagged. The powerful, untouchable CEO was suddenly reduced to a betrayed, aging father staring at the ruins of his life's work. He looked across the table at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, desperate plea for salvation. Nora Harrison breathed out, his voice heavy with total defeat. The company. If the money is gone, the company cannot survive the month. The credit lines are frozen. We have hundreds of employees relying on us. This business is our entire family legacy. It is all we have left. I watched my father crumble. I watched the man who had called me an incompetent, jealous thief just 20 minutes ago suddenly look to me for a lifeline. He still believed he had some measure of authority. He still believed the company belonged to him. He still thought he could order me to fix his broken world. Trent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He wiped a heavy layer of sweat from his brow, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. He looked like a trapped animal calculating the distance to the exit. Harrison stammered, reaching out a trembling hand toward me across the wide table. "We can fix this, Nora. We can pull the family together. We can save the company. We just need time." I picked up the finals manila folder resting in front of me. It was the only document on the table that Marcus had not provided. I pushed the thick folder slowly across the smooth glass surface of the table until it rested directly in front of my father. "You said this company is the family asset," I asked, my voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. "Look closely." Harrison's hands shook visibly as he flipped open the heavy manila folder. He stared at the first page, his thick gray eyebrows furrowing in deep confusion. Patricia leaned over his shoulder, her perfectly sculpted face tight with a sudden, unexplainable anxiety. Trent and Jada remained frozen in their seats, too terrified of Marcus to even breathe. "Read it out loud," Marcus instructed calmly, stepping back to give my father the floor. "Read the name of the majority shareholder of the corporation you just claimed to own." Harrison swallowed hard. The prominent vein in his neck pulsed. His voice trembled as he spoke the words written on the official corporate registry. "Apex Holdings, they own 60% of all voting shares." Trent scoffed, a desperate, hollow sound escaping his throat. "That is impossible. We own this company. Dad built it. We control the board." "You controlled a carefully maintained illusion," Marcus corrected him smoothly, picking up a pen and twirling it in his fingers. 3 years ago, your father's outdated business model and your disastrous early investments pushed the corporation to the brink of total bankruptcy. The banks refused to extend your credit lines. Foreclosure was imminent. The company was financially dead. Harrison looked up from the paper, his eyes wide and panicked, staring at Marcus as if the lawyer were a ghost. An angel investor stepped in. Harrison stammered, defending his pride. "A private equity firm routed through Delaware. They injected $10 million to restructure our debt. They saved us. We signed over a controlling stake, but they allowed us to maintain operational control. They were a silent partner." I stood up from my chair. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my tailored suit jacket and looked directly at the man who had spent my entire life telling me I lacked vision and ambition. "They were not silent," I said, my voice echoing in the sterile room. "They were just watching you." I walked around the edge of the mahogany table, commanding the space. Every eye followed my movement. The air in the room was thick with the sudden crushing weight of reality crashing down on their fabricated world. "Apex Holdings is not a faceless private equity firm." I continued, my gaze sweeping past Patricia's horrified expression and locking onto my father. "I founded Apex Holdings 5 years ago with the initial capital I made from my first independent software patent. The exact same patent you called a waste of time. When you drove the family business into the ground, I used my firm to bail you out. I routed the capital through shell companies because I knew your massive ego would never accept a bailout from the daughter you despised. Harrison slumped back in his leather chair as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The realization was destroying him from the inside out. He did not own the empire he bragged about at the country club. He was a figurehead, an employee relying on my capital to survive. You are lying! Patricia shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. She slammed her hand flat on the table. You could never afford that. You were just a secretary. Trent ran the finances. Trent ran the finances straight into a brick wall, I countered sharply, silencing her instantly. I saved this company. For the past 3 years, I allowed you all to sit in your corner offices, drive your company leased cars, and pretend you were titans of industry. I let Trent play CEO in waiting because it kept him distracted while I actually managed the real corporate strategy from the back end. I owned the building you worked in. I owned the chairs you sat on. I funded the payroll. For 36 months, every single one of you has been working for me. Richard Sterling, the family lawyer, was practically shoving his files into his briefcase. His face was the color of ash. He stood up, avoiding the camera entirely. I am advising my clients to remain completely silent. This deposition is over. We are leaving. You can leave, Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, not moving an inch from his spot. But your clients need to hear the rest of this, because the civil portion of this dispute concluded about 5 minutes ago. I turned my attention entirely to my brother. Trent was sweating profusely, the moisture soaking into the collar of his expensive shirt. His arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic trembling posture of a cornered thief, realizing there was no way out. Jada was sobbing quietly next to him, her face buried in her hands, her designer purse forgotten on the floor. Trent, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. You thought you were so incredibly smart. You thought you could frame the invisible, incompetent sister. You thought you were stealing from Mom and Dad. You thought they would eventually forgive you because you are the golden boy. You thought family loyalty would protect you from the consequences of your own bottomless greed. I leaned forward, resting both hands flat on the table, bringing my face just inches from his. I wanted him to see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. But you did not steal from them, Trent. You stole from the majority shareholder. You funneled $2.5 million directly out of the operating accounts of Apex Holdings. You stole from me. Trent gasped for air, his chest heaving as panic seized his lungs. Nora, please, he begged, his voice cracking into a high whine. We are family. I will pay it back. I will work for free. Just give me time. Do not do this. Mom, tell her. Dad, make her stop. Harrison and Patricia simply stared at the table, utterly paralyzed by the magnitude of their ruin. They could not save him. They could not even save themselves. I straightened my posture, looking down at my brother with absolute terrifying calm. You crossed state lines and international borders to hide stolen corporate assets belonging to an entity you do not own, I stated, quoting the exact legal statutes Marcus and I had prepared for this exact moment. You forged corporate documents. You committed wire fraud, and you committed perjury on a recorded camera today. You did not just break a family trust, Trent. This case just officially became a federal crime. The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Federal crime. For a moment, the only sound in the conference room was the soft whir of the recording camera and Trent's ragged, panicked breathing. Then the reality of my statement shattered the remaining silence. Jada shot up from her chair as if she had been physically burned. Her eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted from the bank documents on the table to Trent, then back to the documents. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. She was not just an accessory. Trent had used her maiden name for the Delaware shell companies. He had used her signature for the Cayman accounts. He had built the entire fraudulent architecture around her identity. If the federal authorities brought the hammer down, she was not just going down with him. She was positioned to take the hardest hit. You set me up, Jada whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and absolute fury. She backed away from the table, staring at Trent like he was a venomous snake. You used my credentials. You made me open those accounts. You told me it was a standard tax shelter for the family trust. Trent reached out to her, his hands shaking violently. Jada, please keep your voice down. The camera is still rolling. We can hire a crisis firm. We can fix this together. Fix this. Jada shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. Her carefully cultivated image of a sophisticated, untouchable luxury broker completely disintegrated. She was just a terrified woman staring at decades behind bars. There is no fixing federal wire fraud, Trent. You stole millions from your own sister's private equity firm, and you used my name to do it. You made me a money launderer. She ripped her designer purse from the floor and violently dug her hand inside, pulling out her phone. Her chest heaved as she glared at the man she had sworn to stand beside. With a sudden aggressive motion, Jada grabbed her left hand. She gripped the massive custom-designed diamond engagement ring and the matching wedding band that Trent had bought her with stolen corporate funds. She yanked them off her fingers so hard it left a red mark on her skin. Trent flinched. Jada, do not do this. Do not walk out on me. Jada wound up and threw the heavy rings directly at his face. The diamonds struck Trent squarely in the cheek before clattering onto the mahogany table and spinning onto the carpet. I am filing for divorce today, Jada screamed, her voice breaking into a hysterical sob. I am not going to prison for you. I am not losing my real estate license for you. I am calling my personal defense attorney right now, and I am telling them everything you did. You are on your own. She did not wait for his response. She did not look at Harrison or Patricia. Jada spun on her expensive heels and bolted for the heavy glass doors of the conference room. She shoved them open and practically ran down the corridor, her frantic voice echoing as she yelled into her phone demanding her lawyer. Trent watched her go, his mouth hanging open in shock. The last pillar of his support system had just collapsed. His high-priced corporate lawyer was gone. His wife had abandoned him and was actively turning state's evidence against him. He was completely, utterly isolated. Trent's legs seemed to give out. He dropped heavily back into his chair, his elbows hitting the table. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob. The golden boy, the untouchable heir to the corporate throne, was reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating mess. He rocked back and forth, muttering incoherent pleas to a room that offered no sympathy. I turned my gaze away from my broken brother and looked at the other end of the table. Harrison and Patricia remained glued to their seats. They were staring at the printouts of the Apex Holdings corporate registry and the international wire transfers. The color had completely drained from my father's face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. My mother looked as though she had stopped breathing altogether. They were finally putting the pieces together. The puzzle was horrifying in its clarity. 3 years ago, when the bank threatened to seize the family estate and liquidate the corporation, a mysterious private equity firm had stepped in with a miraculous $10 million cash injection. Harrison had celebrated his own brilliant negotiating skills. Patricia had hosted a lavish country club dinner to boast about their corporate survival. They had spent 36 months living off the life support that I had secretly provided. I had saved them from absolute ruin, choosing to stay in the shadows because I knew their pride could never swallow a rescue from their despised, overlooked daughter. And how had they repaid their silent savior? They had allowed Trent to systematically bleed that very same private equity fund dry. They had turned a blind eye to his lavish spending, assuming his financial genius was generating record profits. And when the money ran out and the audits loomed, they had eagerly, viciously participated in a plot to frame me for the theft. I watched the horrifying realization dawn in my father's eyes. Harrison's jaw trembled. He looked at Trent, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands, and then he looked at the blinking red light of the deposition camera. The camera was still recording. It had captured every single word of the proceedings. Harrison realized the gravity of what he had done just an hour prior. He had sat in that very chair, raised his right hand, and sworn an oath to tell the truth. Under the guidance of Richard Sterling, Harrison had confidently testified that Trent was the victim. He had testified that I was an unstable, vindictive employee who lacked authorization. Patricia had enthusiastically agreed on the record, actively corroborating Trent's fabricated timeline. They had not just lied to protect their son, they had committed formal documented perjury during a legal proceeding. They had willingly entered false testimony into the public record to destroy me completely unaware that they were aiding and abetting a massive federal theft against the very entity keeping a roof over their heads. They had sworn under oath to protect a criminal who robbed their only benefactor. Harrison's hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles turned white. He looked up at me, his authoritative, commanding presence entirely eradicated. He was a terrified old man staring into the abyss of federal prosecution, corporate bankruptcy, and total public disgrace. Nora Harrison, whispered his voice, cracking thick with an unfamiliar, suffocating dread. What have we done? You dug your own graves. I answered, my voice steady and devoid of any warmth or sympathy. I watched the realization sink deep into my father's bones. The man who had commanded boardrooms, intimidated competitors, and dictated my worth for my entire life was now slouched in his chair, visibly shaking. His aristocratic posture had collapsed. He looked from me to the closed glass doors of the conference room, as if expecting the consequences of his actions to physically manifest and drag him away. Patricia could no longer maintain her stoic country club facade. Her chest heaved and a ragged, ugly sob tore from her throat. She pushed her chair back so violently it nearly tipped over and stumbled toward me. Her perfectly manicured hands reached out, grasping desperately at the sleeve of my suit jacket. "Nora, please!" she wept, her voice shrill and entirely broken. Mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines, ruining her flawless makeup. "You cannot do this. You cannot send your brother to federal prison. He made a mistake. A terrible, foolish mistake. But we can fix it privately. We can sell the vacation home. We can liquidate my jewelry and the art collection. We will pay you back every single cent he took. Just please do not ruin his life." I looked down at the hands clutching my arm. These were the exact same hands that had pointed me toward the door when I begged for their support years ago. I took a deliberate step backward, forcing her grip to slip away from my jacket. "Ruin his life?" I asked, keeping my tone deadly quiet. "He ruined his own life, Mother. And you helped him do it. You sat in that witness chair not even an hour ago and committed perjury to ensure I would be the one going to prison. You were perfectly willing to let me rot behind bars for a federal crime I did not commit just so your precious son could avoid accountability. Where was your maternal instinct then? Where was your desperate need to protect your family when I was the one being thrown to the wolves?" She flinched as if I had struck her across the face. She brought her trembling hands up to cover her mouth. "But you are strong, Nora," she blubbered, her logic twisting into desperate, hypocritical knots. "You always survive. You always land on your feet. Trent is fragile. He cannot handle a scandal like this. He would not survive a single day in a federal facility. I am your mother, Nora. We are blood. We are family. I was only trying to protect my boy. You have to understand that. Family protects family. Family protects family," I repeated, testing the absolute absurdity of her words on my tongue. "That is a fascinating philosophy, considering you just spent the last 3 years living off my money while actively trying to legally steal my home and frame me for corporate fraud." I turned away from her weeping face and walked back to the table. I began to methodically gather my files. I stacked the certified bank records, the Apex Holdings Incorporation documents, and the offshore wire transfer logs into a neat, precise pile. Every slap of paper against the mahogany table made Trent flinch in his seat. He was completely silent now, practically hyperventilating as he stared blankly at the wall, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his impending destruction. Harrison finally found his voice again. "Nora, name your price," he pleaded. His voice was raspy, stripped of all its former booming authority. "I will step down immediately. I will give you my entire share of whatever is left of the company. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire board of directors. Just keep the federal authorities out of this. We can settle this internally. We can draft an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Please, Nora, you hold all the cards. Show some mercy." Marcus, who had been silently watching the entire breakdown from the corner of the room, stepped forward and handed me my briefcase. I slid the documents inside and snapped the golden latches shut. The sharp metallic clicks echoed like a judge's gavel in a silent courtroom. I looked at my parents, and then I looked at my brother. Mercy is a luxury reserved for those who show remorse before they are caught, I stated coldly. Do you remember what you told me yesterday, Mother? When I came to your house, when I asked you to drop this ridiculous lawsuit and look at the actual banking records? Patricia froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized exactly what was coming. She shook her head slightly silently, begging me not to say it. I stared directly into her panicked, tear-filled eyes and fed her exact words back to her. You told me we should not handle things privately. You told me we should just let the legal system handle it. You looked me in the eye and told me to just follow the law. I picked up my briefcase and adjusted my posture, standing taller than I ever had in my entire life. So that is exactly what we are going to do. I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. We are going to follow the law. The federal investigators have already received a duplicate copy of every single document I presented today. The FBI Financial Fraud Division has been reviewing Trent's wire transfers since yesterday morning, and right now there are 2 federal agents waiting in the lobby downstairs to escort Trent into custody. Trent let out a strangled, animalistic cry. He scrambled backward in a blind panic. His heavy leather chair tipped over and crashed onto the floor. He backed himself into the corner of the conference room, shaking his head wildly, muttering to himself as the reality of his arrest finally broke his mind. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the carpet, pulling his knees to his chest. Harrison stared at his son, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The realization that his golden boy was leaving the building in handcuffs had completely shattered him. He looked back at me, tears finally spilling from his aged eyes, landing on the Apex Holdings documents still resting on the table. But the company, Harrison stammered, his voice weak and trembling. What happens to the business? We have contracts to fulfill. We have vendors. We have payroll. You cannot just let it burn. I walked toward the heavy glass doors, pausing just before I reached for the handle. I looked back at the 2 people who had spent my entire life making me feel small, incompetent, and worthless. The company will be perfectly fine, I said smoothly, offering them a razor-thin smile. Apex Holdings will be restructuring the entire executive board by the end of the day. We are bringing in competent leadership to clean up Trent's mess. And as for your roles within that new structure, I am exercising my absolute authority as the majority shareholder. I met my father's broken gaze with eyes of pure ice. Harrison. Patricia. I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air of the room. You are both officially fired. Have your desks cleared out by 5. I did not wait for their protests. I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room, Marcus right beside me. Behind the heavy glass doors, the wailing began, a chaotic symphony of shattered egos and ruined legacies. By the time I reached the elevator, 2 federal agents in sharp suits were already stepping out, their badges gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. I simply nodded toward the boardroom. They bypassed me without a single word. 6 weeks is an incredibly brief period of time in the grand scheme of a human life. But it is more than enough time to completely dismantle an empire built on arrogance and deceit. I watched the fallout from a comfortable distance, receiving regular detailed updates from Marcus and the newly appointed executive team at Apex Holdings. Trent did not put up much of a fight. Confronted with the overwhelming digital paper trail, the forged bank signatures, and his own recorded confession, his high-priced defense attorney immediately advised him to take a plea deal. He traded his tailored Italian suits for a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit. He is currently residing in a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania, serving a strict 5-year sentence for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. There are no country club privileges behind bars. There is no golden boy treatment from the guards. He is just another inmate who thought he was smarter than the system. Jada's frantic attempt to save her own skin by throwing Trent under the bus did not grant her the immunity she so desperately expected. The federal authorities were not interested in her tearful performance. Her signature was stamped on the Delaware Shell Company documents. She had actively used her professional credentials to facilitate the laundering of stolen corporate funds. While she managed to avoid immediate prison time by cooperating fully with the prosecution, the collateral damage to her carefully curated life was absolute. The State Real Estate Commission permanently revoked her broker's license. She is legally barred from ever working in the industry again. Worse, her involvement triggered a massive, highly aggressive IRS audit. The tax investigators seized her assets, froze her accounts, and began dismantling the fake luxury lifestyle she had paraded around for years. She is currently living in a rented studio apartment, fighting off bankruptcy and ignoring endless calls from relentless debt collectors. But the most profound and poetic collapse belonged to Harrison and Patricia. Without the exorbitant corporate salaries they had siphoned for decades, and with Apex Holdings officially severing all financial ties, their hidden reality was laid bare. They had been drowning in personal debt for years, taking out massive unapproved loans against the family estate just to maintain their elite social facade. When the news of Trent's arrest and their own humiliating termination hit the local business journals, their wealthy social circle vanished overnight. The phone stopped ringing. The dinner invitations ceased. They were socially radioactive. The bank moved swiftly and without mercy. The sprawling six-bedroom colonial estate they had prized over their own daughter was foreclosed on within a month. I drove past it once just to see the bright red bank-owned sign hammered into the perfectly manicured front lawn. They were forced to liquidate everything to avoid federal tax evasion charges of their own. Patricia's diamond jewelry, Harrison's vintage car collection, the antique furniture, the imported art, all auctioned off to satisfy their furious creditors. They now reside in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a run-down, noisy complex on the absolute outskirts of the city. The peeling paint-stained carpets and rattling plumbing are a far cry from the marble floors they were accustomed to. Patricia tried to call me twice during their eviction process. She left frantic, sobbing voicemails begging for a loan, promising they had changed, insisting that family should always help family in times of crisis. I deleted both messages without listening to the end. My phone number changed the very next day. I stepped out onto the expansive wooden balcony of my home. It is a stunning, meticulously restored craftsman house perched on a quiet hill valued at $1.2 million. I bought it entirely with my own money earned through my own intellect, protected by my own vigilance. No one can ever claim they gave it to me. No one can ever threaten to take it away. I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing. The air was crisp and cool. Below me, the sprawling city of Seattle stretched out like a glittering canvas, the towering glass skyscrapers catching the final brilliant rays of the evening sun. The sky was bleeding in spectacular, vibrant shades of gold, deep violet and burnt orange. I raised the crystal glass in my hand, watching the rich red wine catch the fading light. A gentle breeze swept off the Puget Sound, ruffling my hair and carrying the fresh, clean scent of pine and salt water. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. It tasted rich, complex, and incredibly sweet. I closed my eyes and smiled. The tightness that had lived in my chest for 30 years was completely gone. The constant, suffocating need to prove my worth to people who were determined to misunderstand me had finally evaporated. I had fought the hardest battle of my life not with shouting or malice, but with cold, undeniable competence. I opened my eyes and looked out at the vast, limitless horizon. My life was finally entirely my own. It was a life built on truth, secured by unyielding strength, and entirely free from their toxicity. And it was absolutely beautiful. The central theme binding these narratives is the painful but ultimately liberating realization that biological ties do not automatically guarantee unconditional love or loyalty. Too often, the people who share our DNA are the very ones most capable of inflicting the deepest emotional wounds. The most vital lesson we can extract from these stories is that sacrificing our personal boundaries to appease a toxic family dynamic will only invite further disrespect. The protagonists in these accounts spent years desperately seeking validation from parents and siblings who were fundamentally committed to misunderstanding them. They accepted being cast as the scapegoat to maintain a fragile fictional peace. However, the profound breakthrough occurs when they realize that their intrinsic self-worth is never defined by someone else's inability to appreciate it. When we finally stop performing for an audience that actively wants to see us fail, we reclaim our personal agency. Furthermore, true security is forged through internal resilience and independent success, rather than relying on a familial structure built on manipulation. The ultimate sweet revenge depicted is not truly about malicious retaliation or destroying those who hurt us. Instead, it is about stepping entirely out of their toxic shadow to thrive on our own terms. By quietly cultivating their own emotional and financial independence, these individuals ensured that when the final inevitable betrayal arrived, they possessed the absolute power to walk away. They allowed natural consequences to take their course without carrying the burden of guilt. Healing begins the moment we stop waiting for an apology that will never come and start investing that energy into our own authentic lives. If you are currently shrinking yourself to fit into a toxic family dynamic, take the first step today to establish firm boundaries and reclaim your own narrative.